placement, yeah. So this is the part, this is great, Susan, you just jumped in there with questions, that's perfect. And this is where we open it up to your questions. I certainly have lots of questions if you don't, but if something is, if you have a burning question, just raise your hand and we'll get going. Okay, go ahead.
I had to move back to Santa Barbara from Los Angeles about 2 years ago. When I came here, I got a temp job right away through an agency, and have been looking ever since and not found anything. And it was suggested to me that maybe part of the problem is that after a certain point you're considered unemployable.
Well, I don't believe that for a minute.
I understand that, yes, but
how many people, when they, I've sent my resume off so many places, they look at your resume and of course there's going to be a gap in it. How do they view that? Oh, she's lazy, she's not looking?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah. Okay, let's address that question. Like, how do you deal with gaps in your employment history? And what occurs to you when you see gaps, and what would you advise students on that?
Okay, so yes, HR professionals are trained to look at gaps. And I just want to set a rule here. You can ask me anything, anyway.
But is all they look at the gaps?
No,
they don't look
not
at
at all.
14 years of solid experience after that.
I didn't.
And you're aware of what's going on in the economy.
Well, what I'm trying to convey is that gaps are something that do need to be addressed, and so it all depends. My view is, what have you been doing in that time? There are a bunch of really valid reasons why you may not have had a specific job, during a particular period. You could have been pursuing other interests.
Right, times have changed too, because
absolutely.
In 2007, I mean, they would have looked at gaps and thrown it away. But in 2012, after what we've all just gone through, they are a lot easier to explain.
Absolutely.
And I would just say, be prepared to address the gaps.
Just say
positively.
So be proactive.
As hard as that can be. You want to address it positively. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
Well, I bet you have very good interviewing skills.
I've interviewed a lot of people in my time.
Yes.
Yes.
You got good skills too, and you can ace it.
It's definitely a lot of interviewing.
I the problem is getting to the interview.
It is a challenge. It absolutely is.
I have a specific question, because I work with a lot of students on their resumes, and when they have a gap, do you have, I always tell them exactly what you said in terms of be prepared to discuss the gap in an interview and what you were doing and why that occurred. But is there any way that you can kind of mediate it in a resume? Like, is there anything you'd recommend doing that might help get to the interview?
Yeah, and you guys can probably help me here, because there are different resume formats. One is called chronological, one's called functional, and then there's a third, which is a hybrid. So oftentimes what I've seen is professionals who've been out of a particular area or field will do a functional resume that says, here are my skills. And the skills are front and center. The jobs are secondary. So we don't really care that from 2006 to 2007 this person did that, because we're so enamored by the skills. So you have options as to how you want to present it. And I mean, I don't know about you two, but I say you've got to tailor your resume for every specific opportunity. It is not a one-size-fits-all that says, here's my resume, this is going to everybody. It's every job requires individual, sort of messaging.
I'd say the other thing you can do is, and the most important, not most important, one very important thing that people often overlook is the cover letter. And a cover letter is your opportunity. Oh yes. Yes, I read them, because the cover letter is where I get to see if you're able to write and how clearly you can present yourself. And also, it's an opportunity for you to say, a cover letter tells me that someone has applied for the role that I'm advertising and not just applied for a job because they need a job. And the cover letter is what says, I read your job description, and I've done this thing and this thing and this thing that exactly is what you're looking for. And I think when you have a chance to meet me and talk about my other skills, you'll see that, whatever you say. But it's where I can tell if someone has actually taken the time to apply for this role.
Exactly, but do you know what's surprising is the three of you are like over 25. So like if you apply for jobs, and then a lot of people that are doing the interview and hiring are like 25.
Yeah.
So that
Well,
I'm laughing because I was 27 the first time I had to fire someone who was 60. And it was the worst. I mean, it was like the third person I'd ever fired. I was at a staffing agency, and it was one of those, like, I had to do it, and I was just like, I can't believe I have to fire this person. But I had to do it.
But is that the way it is in the work world? I mean, because it's been a while. I've been here at City College for some years.
I think it is. I mean,
But
I think
is it?
he's telling you that it is that way. There are people of all ages in all different roles. And I think we should focus on the things that we have control over, which is our resumes and our interviews, and move from there, because we can't control really who's sitting in the HR office. We have to kind of be prepared for everybody.
Yeah.
And I noticed you kind of chuckled when you said, "Oh, do you really read cover letters?"
It's like
Because
I've had and I spend a lot of time doing what you said, drafting it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
No, because I know they do. They don't want it with fluff, and they have scanners.
Yeah.
I've heard too that put it in and look for certain words, and so it lets you know. You know, I see.
We have some more questions. Let's move on here.
Real quick, Valerie, just, can you just brief on the chronological and the hybrid?
Oh, sure. And I think, I know the staffing company I used to work for had these pamphlets that actually had the resume samples. So I'm sure if you Google these kinds of resumes, you can find them. So the chronological just means it's literally, you know, you start with most recent job, and then you kind of go back, and then maybe your education's at the bottom with your skills or something. The other is, it doesn't emphasize the chronology or the dates. It emphasizes more your skill set. So it's like, you know, I have the following, you know, essentially I have the following skills, bullet points, project management, you know, cost analysis. And then, so they're usually like paragraph bullet points, and then at the very bottom are dates and companies. But if you Google those, you probably could find them.
And just to give a little plug for the Career Center, we help people with their resumes every day. We have templates for all of those kinds of resumes, as well as you can find those templates on the website too. So,
And that is the most important thing you have, is your resume.
Yeah.
So the best way to
the
get
worst
back-
resumes every day, all the time. People who write blue ink, who have error typos in their resumes, and that will just get you kicked out. You have to make sure there's no typos and that you can read it. And you don't write stuff in with a pen. And I mean, we used to see the worst.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question that comes up regularly about resumes. Do you, how do you feel about one-page resumes versus multiple-page resumes? Do you have a rule about that, or?
You know, I personally don't, because I think it really depends on the individual. I mean, you know, generally if a person's been working for a while, you know, at a certain level, they're probably going to have a 2-page resume.
Yeah, 2-page would not be a deal breaker.
It's not like, I think there was a period,
Yeah.
I'd say 10 years ago, where you were much less inclined to really look at a longer resume. I think now, especially with computers being what they are, it's like you could take a 2-page resume and put it on 1 page. It just means the recruiter can't read it.
But a 5-page resume, that's not
It's
good.
overkill.
That's
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah.
You don't need to tell me everything you did every day in every job you've ever had.
I mean, typically we're looking 10 years back, right? Would you
Yeah,
say 10 years
10
back?
years,
So
yeah.
4 or 5 jobs. For the most part, you're going to be able to get that on 1 page. If it's a page and a half, that's fine.
Okay.
From your point of view, what is the best way to describe time taken out to raise children?
Exactly what you just
Just
said.
what, yeah.
Have you like heard? You've heard
And
it all
you
though.
don't look at it as a
There is
negative.
so many.
Susan?
No, I don't view that as a
Yeah, time,
negative.
just like they said, time taken out to raise children. Perfect.
And ultimately, if you're interviewing for a company that has a problem with that,
Yeah,
you don't want to
you don't want to
there.
work for that
I mean,
company.
I think that goes back to what you said about culture.
Yeah,
And
yeah, absolutely.
You know, that's a competition kind of thing. You know, if they have 5 resumes and they have someone that's recently been in that job doing that kind of thing, they're probably going to lean towards them. But yeah, as just someone that would be eliminated, the answer would be no. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know this is kind of geared to, it seems a little more geared towards like people who are looking for full-time jobs, but what do you suggest for like coming out of high school? I never had a job, and I was lucky to get a job because it was like I went in saying that they wouldn't let me apply online and they gave me a job, so it was really easy. And I know it's not that easy, so what do you suggest for those of us who don't have a lot of experience to put on a resume?
Think of the things that you've had experience doing. And I mean, it almost sounds like a cliche, probably because we've said it so many times, but there are things that you do in your life that, though they're not employment, they still speak to your skill set and your ability to show up regularly. So if you volunteer regularly at an organization, if you have clubs that you're involved with, leadership roles in that speak to how involved you can be with something, and the skills that you can learn from that are things that can translate to it. I don't have an easy answer for how you get your first job. I mean, there's not an easy answer. It's oftentimes just that. You thought it'd go this way, and it turns out it went in this way. You talk to someone, and they say, oh, you should call my friend Bob. He's hiring. And next thing you know, because you just, were talking to Valerie, and suddenly...
Yeah, exactly. This is a great point. There's a term called transferrable skills. So whenever you're, like, say, transitioning from one vocation to another, let's say you're in accounting, let's say you studied law and you hate it. This happens a lot, actually. And you want to get into something else. So you do the analysis that says, what is it that I've learned in this career period here, and how does that translate to where I want to go? And it's just a level of analysis that allows you to take that and say, look, I can do this because I've done this, and it's transferable. And I'm going to guess you've learned a lot of things along the way that are really valuable, but you maybe haven't thought of them, packaging them in quite that way. And then the other thing I just want to say, because Tom brought up a really good point, the importance of applying for a particular job, and what you're essentially trying to do is to say, here's why I qualify for this job. And you're actually alleviating the pressure from the recruiter of having to go, here's why they qualify. Because your cover letter has done that analysis. It said, here's what they want, here's what I have, and here's why I fit. So I think that's kind of the level of analysis that you want to put forward when you're applying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Great. More questions?
I have a slew if Kristen doesn't either. I teach a career class here, and that's what we're part of. You said at the beginning, twice you've mentioned workplace culture, and that it's important to know about the workplace culture. And so how does somebody find out about the workplace culture so that they are asking the appropriate questions and dressed the appropriate way and getting their foot in the door?
Yeah, great question. Go ahead.
A lot about culture now, which you couldn't get before, is on the internet too.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the company's website and see the kind of things they have posted. You look at companies' Facebook pages, if they tweet, what their tweets look like. If you can find people that work for that company, maybe on LinkedIn, if you do a search of that company on LinkedIn and see what kind of people work there. So it just requires a little research on the internet, and you can get a good idea. And I mean, that's a really good point, because in the old days when you didn't know, people would come in, I would interview them, like, oh, why do you want to work for us? What do you know about us? How do you make a decision? Because I'm going to offer you a job, and next week you're going to start, and what if you hate it? I mean, you don't even know if you like it here. So they would base their decisions on things they saw in the lobby. So it's a lot better these days. You can get information off the internet and
LinkedIn. I mean,
LinkedIn is great.
We were just looking at our company just updated their profile on LinkedIn, and we have a video there, and so you can see employees talking about working there
and why they want to work there and what
now,
they like about it.
Remember, it's all sanitized, of course, right?
Course.
It's not the real dirt.
There's Glassdoor.com, which is the
Glassdoor.
Inside view of a company from employees.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Who here knows what LinkedIn is? Okay. Who here has a LinkedIn account?
Oh yeah.
We're doing a LinkedIn workshop in a couple weeks. So if you want to get a LinkedIn account, you can come to the workshop and learn how to put one together. And I just like to ask you, how much do you use LinkedIn in your process, and do you go and look at people's profiles on LinkedIn when you're hiring?
Number one. It's the number one
Absolutely
sort.
number
Yeah.
one.
We do
It's
it all
Facebook
day,
for
all
finding
the
a job.
time, yeah.
Totally.
It's Facebook for employment. It really is. And people, yeah. I mean, I can't think of another tool that I'd say was better. There's not not Craigslist. There's not a job board out there that's going to be better than LinkedIn.
Actually, when I was researching Tom, I thought that was the only way his company hired was through LinkedIn. And then I finally talked to you, and he was like, no, we have a website. And I was like, oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Even for entry now, for a lot of the entry-level positions and people that are 18, 19, 20, like this gal was just mentioning, they don't have a lot of experience yet. So there's been some hesitation of is this really relevant to freshmen at community college and sophomores?
Yes.
Yes, because a recruiter is using LinkedIn to source. They're doing word matches, and so they might not be looking for a senior level engineer. They might be looking for someone entry level, and so they're going to find you if you've got the right match. And just an example, I never kept my LinkedIn profile updated, and LinkedIn is awesome because it'll tell you your profile is only 10% complete, and they'll prompt you to get it done. And finally, like at one point I just got it done, like it's 95%. When I got it updated 95%, I started getting all these recruiter calls, and I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. So I guess this thing really does work. Yeah, it's pretty amazing in that way. But to your point about culture, what I would say to you is ask. When you're interviewing, and let's say you're interviewing 3 different people, ask them open-ended, so what's the culture here? And one of the things you want to do is you want to measure consistency in that answer. Because if you're hearing one person say something about a culture and you're hearing a very different answer from the third person you're talking to, in any of your interview questions, you want to, that's a little red alert usually, if there's a disconnect between, those things.
Can you explain a little bit what company culture is? Because everybody might not know.
Not legal. No.
I'd say it's the look and the feel of a company, the behavior, unstated and stated behaviors.
Things like, do they take an hour lunch, or do they just eat at their desk, or do they do things outside of work? Do they, it sounds silly, but you see employees like wearing the shirts that the company gives out. Are they proud of who they're working for? When they talk about the things they like about the organization, do you get a sense of them doing things that interest you?
Yeah.
The people that you're talking with, can you connect with them?
Where do you obtain that information?
You obtain it during the interview. And I think this is a thing that, especially if you're looking for a job, you forget. You're also interviewing the company. The company's interviewing you, and they're ultimately, they get to choose whether they're going to hire you or not. You also get to choose. And we have people who we make an offer to, and they say, yeah, no, I'm going to stay where I am, or I'm going to take this other offer instead. So you do have a choice. And so when you're interviewing, you need to ask them questions. When I interview a candidate and say, do you have any questions for me? And they say no, that means they're really just hoping that I'll hire them. That's not what I want to hear. I want to know that you're interested in our culture. I want to know what you think that, what are my chances for advancement here? Sometimes you can get a little miffy about it, but mostly I want to know that the candidate is thinking, what am I going to do to benefit this company, and how am I going to learn at this company?
The other thing I'll say is that I used to interview sort of all day long for all levels of positions, and even executive level positions. And my opening question to any candidate was, so what do you know about us? Yeah. Okay, I can't tell you how many executives hadn't done their research on a company. And in the day of internet research, that's just to me inexcusable. And it would almost be like, we'd almost just weed them out.
Yeah.
So I want someone to tell me when we were started, how the company's held, what our growth strategy is. I mean, seriously, I want to know they've done their research, because that tells me they care. If they care, then they're passionate, and they probably want to be there. So that for me was always a litmus test.
Yeah, that's one of our questions on our application. How did you hear about lynda.com? And I would say a third of the people, maybe a quarter, say something that they're not even sure. You read it and you're like, I'm not even sure that's what we do. I don't know where you got that idea. It's not that hard. We make videos for people to learn skills that they can use in their life and career. Not that hard. But I want to know that you know that about our company, and that you've looked at our website. I've had candidates tell me, I haven't had a chance to look at your website. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, you know what? I looked at your LinkedIn page, I read your cover letter, I read your resume, I called you, we talked on the phone. You haven't looked at my website yet? Come on. Why do you want to work here then?
Any more questions on interviews or anything else? Go ahead.
So as far as military experience being your only major thing, and then taking time off to go back to school, what advice would you have about that, and how do you as recruiters look at that experience?
Well, I personally, I'm a big fan of military experience, given that I think it's a huge character builder. So when I talked about transferable skills, to me, that's just a gold mine.
Absolutely.
And it speaks about work ethic, it speaks about respect, just really important core values that I think every employer is looking at. And I'm going to say something that I hope helps you guys, and not all of you are in the situation, but that transition from school to first job is huge. It's painful in a lot of ways. It was for me anyway. And I noticed that when a lot of individuals come into the companies that I've been in, it's their first job, there's so much to learn, especially about culture and what's acceptable and what's not. And it's you can't just, you know, read a manual that says here's how you're going to succeed at this company. So you really kind of have to watch people. You kind of have to really figure out the culture and, you know, find friends, go to HR. And for example, what you don't want to do is, you know, if you're in a culture that's formal and, you know, talking on your cell phone is not cool, you don't want to be doing that. Right. And some cultures are totally different. People are texting all day long at their whatever, you know, they're that kind of a culture. So you've got to gauge that and read that, because again, that transition from school to work is a vulnerable one, in my opinion.
Another question here? And then there, sorry.
What advice what advice would you give for someone who's over 55 and they're trying to get a job in a completely, totally different area than they've had for the 30 years prior?
You got a tough road ahead of you. I mean, it is going to be a challenge.
Question, and it's for
So the question is, what advice do you have for somebody over 55 trying to get a job in a new profession different than what they've done in the past?
Let me clarify. I didn't mean because you're over 55. I meant more about trying to do a career change after 30 years. So it's not about the age.
I haven't had a whole lot of jobs. I mean, I was in that job for exactly 32 years, and I, like you said about the culture, I never liked it, ever. And I feel like I have to compete with all these young people for a new job that I'm going to like, and I feel very lost.
So I would say don't underestimate the value of the time you did spend working, and that there's something to be said for the duration of you know, the time that you did work, and that there's probably an amazing amount of transferable skills. You might also start to network with people in the new field that you want to get into, and just, you know, take them to lunch, or, you know, see if you can build relationships and ask for their feedback, you know, maybe on your resume or on, you know, some of your concerns about entering that particular field.
You sort of have complementary anxieties to the girl who was sitting here, because she's really worried she doesn't have anything to put on her resume. You have a lot to put on your resume, but you're going for another, you know, a different field.
Because also employers seem to look at the costs of an older person rather than somebody starting out who still lives with mom, doesn't have a mortgage, is not a single parent.
I don't think I've ever thought about that, really. I mean, honestly.
Could you again repeat for the class?
Our concern is that employers will look at the costs associated with an older person, meaning health insurance costs and those sorts of things, right? And I can actually tell you I've never thought about that in terms of hiring someone. I'm always looking for the person who's going to do the best job.
Right.
The best person for the job who's going to do the best job. And and that's what I'm concerned about.
Generally, the people who are most vulnerable within an organization are the highest paid people, because when the company has to cut, they're looking at salaries.
Yeah.
More questions? There's one right here.
Hi, I'm looking for a job in software development. Unfortunately, my degree I got over 20 years ago, and all the jobs these days they require you have .NET experience, and I don't have that. You know, I've done a lot of mainframe programming, database programming. I mean, I think those are transferable skills, but I can't say yes, I have the required, you know, experience. Do you have any, suggestions?
You know, there's certain hard skills that employers are looking for that you just can't transfer. I mean, there are some skills that clearly lead to that way, but they're probably more soft skills like leadership and dependability and punctuality and things like that. But there are certain hard skills that you just have to go back and
like databases,
learn.
They're all asking for SQL Server. I mean, I
That's
took
not
lynda.com.
I was going to say, lynda.com has courses in that.
I did. I've been taking them. But that's all. I mean, I can only put them under my my education. I don't have any, paid experience in those areas. Is there some way I can say I'm willing to learn? I've got great foundations in, database concepts.
And there might be someone willing to take you on.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, but some hard skills can't be
so I
substituted.
would like write that in my cover letter maybe?
Yeah, I would say something like, while I don't have I'm an incredibly quick learner, and
And I understand object-oriented programming concepts, and I understand, and so again, talk about the related skills that your experience with client-server development has informed your knowledge of this, and there are companies out there that are not using the latest technologies, and so that may be an entree, a good way into one of those companies. But ultimately, anything you can do, and especially software engineering is one of those that you really, you want to stay up to date on the technology, and it's hard because there's so much and it's so fast.
We have a question back here.
Yeah. Do you think it's wise? I don't have any work experience, and I know a lot of jobs want you to have work experience. Do you think volunteer work could be considered work experience?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, you don't want to discount volunteer experience. It's still work, you can still get paid.
Yeah.
So when you're describing your volunteer experience, you describe it as basically like your other job, and you use them as a reference?
I see that on resumes all the time where it's just in there. And sometimes you're looking at a resume and almost trying to parse, like, wait, when were they in school, and then when was this job? Because maybe it was just summertime. Yeah, that's absolutely experience you can put on there.
It's also a good gap filler, too.
Yeah?
Yeah, so I kind of came in when you guys were talking about gap fillers, and so just to retouch, because I have, for me personally, just a large chunk of time where I'm not doing anything, but then more recently where I'm doing stuff again, how would you go about writing down a resume?
We said earlier about being honest about, what you were doing. If you were in prison, I don't think I'd put that.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Could you address that though?
Prison?
Also, because we have actually, at City College, we have a very strong population of people who have returned to school, they take their time, they've done their debt to society, and is all taken care of. And how do they address that on a resume?
I'm not sure you would. I would put that on there and reserve that for the face-to-face interview, because that could be just a deal breaker in the very beginning. And you want to put stuff on your resume, people want you. There's a reason they want to talk to you. You have a skill that they need and they need to talk to you about. So putting things on there like, the date you were born and just things that, don't need to be on there until you go to a face-to-face interview, because that's your goal. Like you said, you send out a lot of resumes, you don't get responses. Your goal is to get a response and get in there and show them who you are and what you offer. So putting things on there that could be looked at differently, I wouldn't do that.
Is there some reason that so many employers will post things on Craigslist, but they don't identify themselves? That's the problem I'm having. When I sent out to actual companies that identify themselves, I do get responses. But unfortunately, a lot of the jobs that I'm looking for on Craigslist, it's a minefield.
Yeah.
Craigslist.
Yeah. It is a minefield.
I'll tell you what I advise students, because we talk about Craigslist a lot, and and there is so much there that there are going to be some opportunities that you want to submit your resume for, but I think that's a little bit unfair that they don't identify themselves.
I agree.
And I think you could say something like, I'm submitting my resume in good faith, I'd like to know more about your company, please let me know who you are so I can do some research and tailor my letter to you, or something like that. And the other thing I say is to proportionally spend time on things that are not sure bets, but things that spend your time wisely. If you're sending a resume and cover letter out to somebody who hasn't identified themselves, I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. But instead, if you found a place and you're like, wow, I'm really a match for this, you can do some research, you can maybe call the person who's going to be the supervisor, that's where you really want to invest some time. So, kind of think about it in those terms.
I'm a firm believer in a targeted job search.
Yes.
So when you need to identify somewhere in your head what exactly is the kind of company you want to work for, what is the kind of job you want to have, and then go after it. That's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And people that just
yeah.
blanketly send out 160 resumes, you can't possibly be qualified for 160 jobs.
No, I've been very.
And I don't mean you. I just mean in general. I
No,
hear
people
people that do that.
Yeah.
They do that all the
It's amazing.
time. And Santa Barbara's a small community again, and you send your resume to the same guys 5 times, you know, it's never going to get read. So just do a targeted job search for where you want to go, and then focus how to get that job.
Got a question right there?
Yeah. Back to when you were talking about the types of resume. I heard, because I got a buddy that's an engineer for neurological stuff, and I got 2 that's in the CEO positions, like head honchos and stuff. They said a lot of new resumes that they're getting, people are doing video resumes instead. Have you guys heard about that? Or
Sure. It's a new thing, yeah.
Yeah, people are doing
that's
those.
a good thing? Like, do you think that's better than the original resumes because it shows who you are and more of your characteristics?
I think there's going to be some ruling on
Yeah, right.
video resumes.
You would want to make that in addition to a traditional resume, and I say that because we use an applicant tracking system. So when you apply for a job at lynda.com, you're applying through this software that's run by a company called JobBite, and there's only certain formats you can submit your resume. Yes, you can include a video link, you can include a link or actually the video itself, but you should also still do the resume because that's what the hiring managers are going to want to see. There's more information that you're going to see on a resume than you could put in a video to really present yourself. But I think that a well-done video could be very persuasive.
And there's probably more industries that would be amenable to a video resume. You know, if it's a bank, I don't think they want a video, but maybe in
something like
software,
us, right? Still, we would have thought that. I mean, I actually had a couple come in. Yeah.
Sure.
But
media, if you're going that route.
But other more.
I mean, with Lynda, we have roles at lynda.com. We want a video, but it's not a video resume. It's more video of like your real, like things projects that you've worked on or things you've designed.
Sooner or later, those are going to be considered discriminatory, and they will not be allowed.
Yeah.
Because if you see who the person is before you even meet them, I mean, you can discriminate. That's not going to be allowed.
Yeah.
It's just like job gaps too. There's been recent rulings by courts that said employers cannot consider periods of unemployment against an applicant. So there's going to be more and more about that as well.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Do people like research and like look at like Google you and find out like your age and then go? I mean, I know it's supposed to be illegal, but
I mean, you have to be honest. I mean, there are employers that will do that. And there are employers, and if you put your address and your phone number on your resume, they can Google that. They can Zillow your address and find out where you live. I mean, there's just things I would not put on there until you had to disclose, because it's a reason they can eliminate you, and you want them to have reasons why they want you. So unless you have to put it on there, if you go online and fill out applications and they request an address, then you're going to have to do it. But
there's been a lot of court rulings about, Facebook and, employers going in and looking at people's activity and all of that. But, I mean, I would just say, use discretion in your personal life and,
There's also FECRA rulings about using criminal backgrounds.
Right. Well, there's a startup company here in Santa Barbara called Higher Knowledge, or I forget what it's called.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And they do pre-employment and current employment social media screening. So in other words, I'm looking at candidates, I give them the list of candidates, they hire people for a penny an hour or whatever to go, I'm not kidding, in like third world countries to go online and start researching you. And they're looking for all of your social media sites. And they're going to look for specific 27, I think, categories that I've told them. I want them to look for, drug use, violence, da-da-da. They've got 27 categories. I don't use this. I wouldn't use it at my company. I think it's horrific. I think you're allowed to have your private life. But there are companies that do this, and it's done through FECRA, the Federal Credit Reporting Agencies. It gets certified, and so it's legal. But think about the things you posted on Facebook or tweeted or whatever. Imagine an employer looking at that or reading that. All of it. And you wouldn't want that.
Yeah, and that's a good reason to have a LinkedIn account, because you can start to kind of build a professional online presence with the stuff that you want people to see. And these 3 HR professionals have told you that's their #1 go-to source, and you have a lot of control over that. Okay, we have time for about 2 more questions. I'm going to get one here. And about you?
So if you have a LinkedIn profile, do you guys also go to the Facebook, or just because as a coming out of high school student, my Facebook isn't like, I work every day.
Right.
You know.
We don't.
Yeah. No.
We never do it.
I never look at the social media things. In part, I don't want to know.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
I'm
I
serious.
see the beer kegs and.
Oh, I've seen, seriously, I've seen everything. From my friends or whatever. I mean, think about the things you see on people's Facebook pages. And I mean, I have friends, I wouldn't hire them based on what they post on their Facebook pages, you know.
But I see that as their personal. I see LinkedIn as,
Yep.
as professional.
Agreed.
Facebook is silly. LinkedIn is
Yeah.
professional. It's really what you want to say about you as your work ethic kind of thing.
Yeah.
Great. And we had a question right here. Did you have a question?
I just had a question in regard to like people researching you in your social medias. Is that like your accounts are not set to private, or they find a way to like get in and view it?
So I met with these guys because they were trying to get me to hire them to use their service
Those
at RightScale.
forensic people, they can get you. Whether you're private or not, they can find
Yeah,
it.
I mean, honestly, they can find it. They can find it. No, they're not getting into your account. There were companies that were requiring people to give their username and log and passwords. That's been ruled. That was ruled illegal, right? I mean,
ridiculous.
but there are companies that have asked for that. I think that's insane.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure how they do it exactly. I mean, the way he explained it to me, I still wasn't sure how they really got to the information.
That's a good idea. You privatize it.
Maybe they friend your friends and they see it that way.
Mine's completely private, but can people still get in?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Nothing on
Nothing.
All right, we have
Super private.
one question
Yeah.
here, and I know you've had a question too, and then Val, so go ahead, right there.
I'm curious how somebody might deal with being terminated both on the resume
great
and then
question.
also in the interview, and when they ask if they can contact their last employer, if it's a situation where you don't think they're going to give you a good recommendation, they're probably going to give you a guide on whether they're supposed to or not. How do you, and I mean, I work with the job that I'm thinking of is, 2 years, and it's my last job, and I've been to interviews where it's just a hard situation to address.
I'd say be proactive. I would say address it first if you can, and you can, first of all.
Do you mean in the interview or on the resume?
Resume.
Yeah, I mean in the interview you're gonna. It's gonna come up, right? It may or may not. Typically someone will ask, well, why did you leave your last job? And if you have a compelling reason, and as far as I'm concerned, a compelling reason is it wasn't a good culture fit, or, there's a 1,001 really legitimate reasons why. You can leave a company, or a company can, decide to fire you, and you can still have, a sanitized version of why that was. I think it's probably happened for all of us in our careers. Yeah, it's not, to be fired is not the end of the world. You will live again.
It feels like it for a bit.
Yeah.
And it feels like it when you have to go talk about it. The key is when you go talk about it, try to be positive. And I know that can be tough, but try to be positive.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, would you tell them yes or no about contacting your last employer?
I would say that I prefer, my response would be I prefer that you not. And you'd hope that, but you can give them other references. Say I prefer, I'll give you these contacts. You don't have to, now they still might. And depending on why you were fired, I mean, if you were fired for stealing, well, one, even if I called and got a reference, they're not going to tell me that legally. They can't tell me that. They can just tell me that you worked here from this date to this date. If I say, did she earn this amount, they can confirm that. And what's the other?
Eligible for rehire.
Eligible for rehire. Now that's the flag for they were fired. But I'll tell you what, I've said people were eligible for rehire and that they weren't fired. They're just people I would not hire again. So you may not have a problem from it. The fear of it and fear of the problem from it may be the harder part to overcome.
And I think what I heard from the panel is I probably wouldn't address it on your resume. And wait to do that in person and kind of walk through it. So, and we'd be happy to help you in the Career Center. We help people kind of think through that stuff all the time. Okay, I had one question. You were waiting.
Yeah, I had a comment about the references. When I worked at UCLA and I was hiring people, there was sort of a code word, and it was beware of positive references, because it usually meant that the department was trying to get rid of it.
In academic environments, that's very common.
Yes.
I've heard that from UCSB as well.
Yeah, and but my question was, you each
Seriously?
yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
They want them out of their department, and they'll transfer over to another department. So they'll say the sun and the moon rose and set on them.
They're
and
wonderful. They're great. You're gonna love them. Just get them out of my department. You all mentioned that you didn't work in medical. That's my field. Why do you not work in medical, or is that?
Well, Trish did, yeah.
We just don't do clinical. We do non-clinical healthcare, but just not clinical healthcare because of the liability.
Yeah.
Placing doctors
Yeah.
kill people. That would not be good. I would be sued.
In applying for a job, if at one point I had a very high-level job, and at this point I'm not looking for such a high-level job, is that something that's looked down upon, or is that?
There's going to be questions about the progression in your career. Usually we look for people that are mobile and upward progressing. You might want to downplay the fact that you had a higher level position. Call it something different. Instead of being a director, you were a specialist or.
Oh, I don't know if I'd change your title though, because they check it. I get what you're saying.
It's the same job description. It's
yeah.
Or leave it out. Because they're gonna, if you're a director and now you're applying for a lower level position, they're gonna go, well, she was a director. Why would I want to?
As long as your expectations are aligned with that. So if you were a director and now you want to be a generalist, but you still want to earn $120,000 a year, then I've seen that on resumes. Well, I see people applying for jobs that pay $150,000 a year and they have literally no experience in the field. I think we can all speak to getting resumes from people who are wildly unqualified for the roles they're applying for. Yeah, that bugs us.
One more question, and then right there, and then that's you, sir.
Me?
Red T-shirt.
I just have a quick question on job experience, putting that on resumes. Is it only good to put just relevant job experience? Like, I'm a business major and say applying for business-related jobs. Should I only put my past jobs that were, say, specifically business-related, or because I know I don't have a huge amount on my resume as far as work experience goes.
It's a good question. Probably the way I'd address it is a little bit more of maybe a couple categories, like your business-related jobs, and then you can put other, and you can literally just list those things. Because again, I think there's viability in the transferableness of those things you did.
And if you don't have a lot, you're showing that you have a work history, you're showing that you know how to have a job, you've shown up for work. We're going to close. Maybe you have a few moments to hang out and chat with students if they have some burning questions. I would just like to make finish with a comment that Val and I were talking about is, and I think you touched on it, all of you, in different ways, is that networking and meeting people and talking to people is a really important part of getting a job. And going online and doing that research, that's even a way of networking. And you are all actually at a networking event right now. You're meeting 3 professional HR people who hire people or who have hired people. You're meeting 2 people who work in the Career Center, Val and I. And so this is a way to network, and now you've built your network. We, in some way, all know each other, and you should use us. You should call on us. You should send us an email. You should find our LinkedIn profile and connect with us. And I really want to thank you for taking the time. This is something important. I really want to thank our panelists. Thank you for making time in your busy day.